they cannot repay you. But you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. And that ends our reading for this morning. The Word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Story that Bob just read for us. It was this story that comes from the 3rd chapter of the Bible that came to mind for me. It is that story that I think is in the background of what we just heard. It is the story of what is referred to as Adam and Eve's fall from the harmony of the garden. I don't see it as a historical event, but I see it as a very apt description of the human condition. This extraordinary self-consciousness that afflicts every human being once we leave behind young childhood. This preoccupation with ourselves expressed in the need for Adam and Eve to hide themselves behind the fig leaves and to hide from God. This sense of profound unworthiness and self-condemnation that afflicts them. And they avoid this self-condemnation by condemning and judging each other. Adam blames Eve, Eve blames the serpent. Anything to take the sense of self-condemnation away. Jesus told that story about the possibility of being humiliated, that you're in the wrong seat at the table. It was like Adam and Eve being humiliated, caught in their sin of the garden. So the context for our gospel reading is, it seems, a rather tense one. It's full of the same paralyzing self-consciousness and condemnation of others that is expressed in this story, and they go hand in hand. On the Sabbath, Jesus is a guest at a dinner party hosted by a leader of the Pharisees. The impression you get from Jesus is he's willing to go to anybody's house who will invite him for a party. He loves parties. But the impression you get is that this particular dinner party didn't have a whole lot of joy, and that the people at this party were preoccupied with self-consciousness about their reputations and the question of where they ranked in the good people club. And nothing kills joy like self-consciousness and a judgmental spirit, and it is thick as can be there. The question of worthiness and social ranking was high on people's minds, and we are told that at the outset that people were watching Jesus closely, not because they were open-minded, open-hearted regarding what they might learn from him, but because they were on the lookout to catch him doing something they could criticize. We heard last week in the story that immediately preceded this one about how on the Sabbath, in the synagogue, Jesus healed a woman who had been bent over for 12 whole years, and instead of rejoicing, the leader of the synagogue lashed out at the crowd because that, in his mind, was a breaking of the law regarding keeping the Sabbath. And so the righteous people present at this party seem to be watching to see if he'll do it again, which in the portion that actually was skipped over in Bob's reading, he does. He heals yet another person who is afflicted, in this case, with the disease case of dropsy, while the people sit there in judgment. And then we read, when Jesus noticed how the guests chose the places of honor, he told them a parable. He sees them afflicted with this self-consciousness regarding how they rank. And in my reading of the so-called parable he tells, it's really kind of tongue-in-cheek, focusing attention on this incredible self-preoccupation with status, with rank, telling them to be sure not to overreach when it comes to taking your seats of honor at the dinner party. God forbid you get humiliated and have the host have to tell you to get out of a seat that you're not worthy for. It harbors back to the story of Adam and Eve and their shame. No, he says, when you get invited to a party, seek out the lowest places. Because Jesus says, God is at work in this world, humbling the proud and raising up the humble. That's what God is always doing. And then he proceeds to give some advice on how to throw a party, which is to invite those who never get invited to parties: the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Let the invitation be all about giving with no calculation of what you can get in return. And I think that this is good advice when it comes to finding a pathway to freedom from that paralyzing self-consciousness that is our inheritance from Adam and Eve. I read an article that moved me recently about this 29-year-old man who lives in Pittsburgh named John Potter. He's a pretty ordinary guy. Back in 2015, John was at a gas station filling his car, and this woman came up to him and asked if he would give her a ride to the battered women's shelter, and he said no. And she walked away, and he quickly began to have this wave of regret come over him. He went looking for her, but he could not find her. And he vowed right then and there to be kinder to the next stranger who came to him for help. He belonged to a Reddit group. If you don't know what Reddit is, you have to be a certain age, I think, to know what Reddit is. It's an online forum for people to enter into conversation with one another, and there's this Reddit group about things happening in Pittsburgh. And there was someone there who was asking for help to install a television antenna. And John was a pretty handy guy, so he went and offered his services and refused to take any pay for it. And he felt great about it. And soon after, there was somebody who was looking for someone to look after their cat. And he jumped at the case, at the opportunity. He decided that for the next year, if anyone asked for help, as long as it was legal and it wouldn't harm anyone, he'd do it. And soon he was committing an act of kindness almost daily. It snowballed from there, said Potter. I decided that if anyone has asked my help, I was going to do it. It sounds ridiculous, but I did it. And soon he was committing these acts throughout the community of Pittsburgh, helping someone repair vinyl siding, moving furniture, fixing a leaky roof, changing a grandmother's tire at the side of the road, all for free. He even raised $700 for a teen in the community who had been injured, stopping a hate crime. His 1 year of goodness was so fulfilling that he turned it into a 4-year stretch of saying yes to random requests for strangers, hundreds, perhaps thousands. Though this was not his goal, before long, John was attracting attention from his community. There is this Reddit lore about him, said one friend he met along the way. There are all these legends of these cool things he's done, and they're true. All these stories about people expressing gratitude for him. About 2 years ago, Says one person on Reddit, "You brought me groceries during what was the de facto darkest point in my life. I'm sure I've gotten lost in the sea of good deeds you've done, but that little moment helped me bounce back in a big way." And strangely, it wasn't just the other people who were helped, it was helping John on a very deep level. He said that he had struggled with depression and anxiety since he was 8 years old. And that last year he was diagnosed as high-functioning autism. And said that the realization of this was like this huge puzzle piece in his life that suddenly was solved. And he said that in pushing himself to interact with people by helping them, it gave him a new appreciation of others. He describes himself as happier now, less depressed. Quote, "I trust a lot more than I did in the past. I trust people's intentions more." When asked whether people might be scamming him, taking advantage of his kind heart, John answered, "Maybe, but it doesn't really matter. It's worth the risk of getting scammed compared to the possibility of helping someone or saving somebody's life." There was a recent example of a father who posted on Reddit that he was thinking of killing himself because he was going through a separation from his wife, and he needed an immediate $2,000 to pay his bills. Everybody on Reddit was like, "This guy's a scam." But John thought to himself, it might be true. What if he really is going to kill himself? And John ended up going to the man's house and lending him the money, the most he'd ever lent out. And said the man was extremely grateful and is already starting to pay him back. "It's very sobering," John said. "No one else was going to help this guy. In the past, I never would have said yes." Another example, early in his kindness blitz, someone posted on Reddit at 1 a.m. that a friend who had just graduated from high school had lost his wallet and was stuck at a party and needed a ride home in the sweltering summer heat. John said other Reddit users were giving the guy a hard time, saying, "Find your own ride. And who's going to give you a ride at 1 a.m.? Everybody was bashing him. But John had a feeling about it. He put his Rottweiler, he had a Rottweiler in his car just in case he needed a little protection. And he went and picked up the teen, and on the ride home at wee hours of the morning, he ended up talking through some of the teen's problems with him. Quote, "He said he didn't want to go to college, he just wanted to stay around town and sell drugs. I told him, maybe you don't want to do that. We talked for 30 minutes about his doubts. He sent me a note later and said, thank you." John upped his generosity recently when he donated a kidney to a complete stranger, a 57-year-old Pittsburgh father of two who was in need of a transplant. The doctors told Potter he had to lose 20 pounds to undergo the surgery to remove his kidney, and he did it. And now he and the man are good friends. Before John's do-gooder lifestyle began 4 years ago, he was paragliding. He was a paragliding flight instructor, and most of his work fell on the weekends. He was generally free on the weekdays and had what he described as a bare-bones lifestyle. Instead of trying to earn more money during the week, he made a decision to dedicate himself to helping others. And 2 years ago, he formalized what he does by creating a website, Pittsburgh Good Deeds, where people can ask for help and also volunteer their services. He now works as a handyman, and when he quotes his clients a price, he tells them to pay what they can. He says, enough people pay the full price to keep them afloat. I get what I need, he said. I'm not very religious, but at this point I definitely believe there's an order to my life, and there's an order to the universe, and I believe the order is good. I'd say John is on his way to knowing Jesus. John said helping others has brought him on a big turn for the better in his own life, especially by keeping his depression and anxiety at bay. He highly recommends his unusual lifestyle and likes encouraging others to help people when they can. Even me, with all these hindrances, he said, referring to his autism and anxiety, if I can do it, you can too. So in a couple of minutes, we will be sharing together the great feast, the gospel feast, the Lord's Supper. And in doing so, we humble ourselves and we let go of that self-consciousness. Nobody's earned their place at this table. It is a gift of grace. So we can just let go of that paralyzing spirit of self-condemnation and condemnation of others and just come humbly to the gospel table to share in the joy of that great love. Jesus loved a good party. He loved a party where people could just let go and be there together and offer one another that love that is a sign that John is discovering of the goodness that undergirds all of creation in spite of all the evil out there. There is a love that ties us all together as one. And it is that love that you're about to witness and experience and rejoice in as we share at the Lord's table. Please pray with me. Oh Lord, you know the ways in which we become paralyzed with self-consciousness and self-judgment and judgment of others and all these things that keep us from being truly whole together. But your grace is mightier than all those powers that would separate us. And we're about to meet that grace abundantly at this table. Allow us to come with open hearts and minds, to be surprised by joy in the grace that is offered here. Allow us to experience the joy of a humble spirit, being blessed with bounty. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. The hymn we're about to sing, you will find